Good afternoon, and welcome to Three of Swords Gaming. And today I would like to talk about fractals. So, with the most recent iteration of how ArenaNet intends to roll out content, this kind of mini expansion idea that they threw out there in was it February of this year, I believe. They said that we would be getting fractals, one fractal for each mini expansion, right? That's super great. Super excited. Now, some folks have kind of grabbed onto the idea that this means we'll be getting a fractal every year because these expansions will be every year. I don't see any indication of that. I don't expect that to be the case. I expect the content to be more like an 18 to 24 month kind of rotation for these expansions. So I'm not under the impression that we are getting content more regularly or more of it than we've gotten in the past. Just the same, the announcement I think is cause to be excited and at least speculate a little bit about what future fractals might look like. Now, I'm not trying to come at this as some kind of fractal expert. I'm not a fractal expert. I'm not really very good at them. I generally, unless I'm with a static group, I tend to stick to T1, T2 fractals because I don't like the feeling of kind of being an anchor to my team. So I prefer to kind of keep it at those lower levels. Um, but I do enjoy them from time to time, and I wouldn't want to stay away from the entertaining speculation associated with what fractals in the future might look like. So that's what I'd like to do today is my top 5 fractals that I would be interested in seeing, not from a boss encounter perspective or a puzzle perspective, but a world building and lore perspective within Guild Wars 2. 5 fractals that I think would help us enjoy Tyria more. Now, I do want to give honorary mention to an idea before I get into my top 5. It's an idea that once upon a time I thought was very good. Now I'm no longer super keen on, but just the same, it deserves mention. And that is the Abaddon fractal that was originally kind of thrown out there as a possibility during the Ellen Keel Evan Nashblade election thing. And apparently, one of the ArenaNet devs, who I think is no longer with the company anyway, stated that whichever one lost would never be introduced. So, in theory, we will never get this Abaddon fractal. And for the longest time, I thought that was a shame because I thought the Abaddon fractal was a pretty decent idea. However, now in 2023, I really am tired of them using Guild Wars 1 as a crutch, and I don't want to see more original Guild Wars content in Guild Wars 2. I prefer they go completely away from that, and I'm concerned that they're not going to. I'm afraid we're going to see some Shiro content in the near future, and I really don't want that, but I have a sneaking suspicion that's on the horizon. Um, be that as it may, I did want to throw out the Abaddon fractal thing just as kind of an interesting thing out there that still could be floating around and that we could potentially see in the future. It is not on my top 5 list, however. My top 5 list starts with number 5, which is something that a lot of players have mentioned before, and I'm part of the group of people who would very much like to see this, and that is what happened with Ritlock Brimstone in the Mist, right? So we know in season 2 he tries to undo the Ascalonian ghost thing, and he drives Sahathan into the ground, and this rift opens up. Sahathan plunges down into the rift, and he goes after it, right? And then we find out that it's like a portal to the Mist. Now the fractals already take place in the Mist anyway, and really like all 5 of my ideas are very Mist heavy, so, or at least 4 of them certainly are. So this would align fine anyway. But I do think this is also like something within the storytelling that we deserve to know more about, right? So season 2, he dives into the Mist. Heart of Thorns, he comes back and he's like, I'm back, baby. But we don't get any clarity when asked what he was doing. He just says, later, cub, and we never get the later, right? We do find out that he learned these new skills from Glint, and that's why we have the Revenant profession. But what did that process look like? And really, more so than that, like what was his adventure like, right? Now, Path of Fire, we learn that he encountered Balthazar and actually set Balthazar free while he was in the Mist, and we get an explanation of what that looked like and why he did it, his reasoning, and so forth. All that's good, but there's an entire adventure there. He was there for months, right? What happened during that time? What was his adventure like? I think there's a lot of storytelling opportunity there. Idea number 4 is another one that is very popular with the community, and I think a lot of folks feel like this ship has sailed. I don't. I think there's still an opportunity for this story to be told in Fractals, and that is Malik, who is referred to by the Nightmare Court as the Harbinger, and I think that's a significant term and something that we still should care about. Now, clearly, it was in reference to Morgemoth and stuff that took place in the Heart of Thorns, but I think we should still care about that. We see Malik in the Sylvari personal story. So if you don't play Sylvari, or if you never have, and specifically if you have not played Where Life Goes, So Too Should You as a level 20 option, then you might not have any familiarity with Malik, but he is a Sylvari who came from a tree other than the Pale Tree. So he's not Sylvari in the Guild Wars 2 like player option sense. He's something else, but still Sylvari. Um, so this opens up like a lot of really interesting things in terms of the lore and the storytelling, right? When they're telling this story, they also mention that there were multiple seeds for multiple trees. So the Pale Tree is only one of plural, one of several, not just one of two. And so there's really a ton of stuff that we can do here, a lot of interesting things that could happen. And I think probably what this fractal would center on, because Heart of Thorns is now well in the past and presumably impacted all this stuff, is it would go back in time and show us what happened with Malik or with some of these other trees during the events of Heart of Thorns. And I don't think they necessarily have to all be converted by Morgemoth. I think there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of really interesting things they could do if they choose to tell that story, and I think they should. I think this is one that I really think they owe to the community, to be quite honest. Number 3 for me is another racial level 20 story, and that is the Asura story of the Infinity Ball. So this one's really interesting, it kind of stands out from some of the other personal story options, and most of them ultimately lead you towards where the commander is, right? So most of your personal story takes you towards being the commander. The Infinity Ball story arc doesn't do that at all. Instead, it focuses on what could be, and then we don't go that direction. And when it focuses on what could be, it focuses on like multiple realities, kind of this multiverse kind of thing. And in the multiverse, or the one reality that we see through this Infinity Ball, the player character has taken over the world like supervillain style, and is the one apparently responsible for the steam creatures. Now this is really interesting because Season 2 suggests that Scarlet made the steam creatures, right? Scarlet Briar. So is there conflict there? I don't know. I've always felt like it was a conflict. It's something that I would like to see kind of clarified. It's really, really like fine, kind of tiny lore point, and not something that's significant to a majority of players. But I do feel like there's conflict there, and I'd love to see that resolved. Now, Scarlet actually mentions the Infinity Ball. If you are an Asura who played that particular level 20 story option, when you're in the Tower of Nightmares with Scarlet. However, she mentions any level 20 story choice that any character has made, regardless of race or what selection they made. So I don't know that it's super significant. Just the same, I would love to see that kind of develop further. That would be a fun one for me. I think it's less significant lore-wise than some of my other choices, than any of the other 4 choices, but it's one that I'd find super entertaining. Number 2 for me, I know we already have 2 fractals that focus on the Aether Blades. However, really, those 2 fractals are one instance that's been split into 2 pieces, and it's one instance that was taken from Season 1. We did not have Season 1 available to us. Now we have Season 1 available. So there is some overlap there between those 2 fractals and story that we already have available to us. In End of Dragons, we learned that the Aether Blades, who, by the way, I think are a fantastic enemy, and I think that ArenaNet could potentially, even though from a storytelling point of view the ship's kind of sailed, as an enemy they're so intriguing, so interesting. I think ArenaNet could still do a lot more with them. I think they're a lot of fun. They're a very fun adversary. In End of Dragons, we learn that in order to keep their fleet afloat, so to speak, after the events of Scarlet and her death, they go into the mists, and essentially the Aether Blades farm the Aether Blade Fractal, right? The Aether Blades repeatedly battle with themselves and rob the fleets of themselves that they defeat to get parts to continue to go. And so there's so many weird questions begged by this. Are the Aether Blades that we encounter in End of Dragons even the same Aether Blades that we would have battled in Lion's Arch? Or are they a different version? Are they different versions entered our reality? Because these various Aether Blades have been battling in the mist. I think there is so much you could do with that. And this could be like a Thumanova reactor kind of thing where they put us into the position of being the Aether Blades. You know, we see that with the Palawa Joko, like Twilight Oasis Fractal as well, where they make us somebody else. Urban Battlegrounds does the same thing. They could easily make us Aether Blades for this one, and it would be a really fun, really interesting thing. And again, because the mists are so diverse and the Aether Blades presumably traveled the breadth and width of them, um, then they could put us anywhere battling the Aether Blades, and I think it's a really fun idea. It would also give us maybe a little bit more Anka, who I think was a good enemy. The reason for her limited screen time was understandable. It was not the primary drive of that storyline, but just the same, I think that more Anka wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. Now, she can actually, I didn't know this until just recently, apparently you can find her in the Thumanova Fractal as an Inquest intern, which I think is a very interesting thing. But just the same, more Anka as a bad guy, not necessarily that we fight her, but that we see her more, I think would be a really cool thing. So finally, my number one Fractal, the thing that I would most like to see ArenaNet do with a Fractal, is for us to go find Blish. Now, I want to be really clear what I'm talking about here, because there is something that ArenaNet does with pretty significant regularity that I really, really don't like, and that is that they, through the story, they render death irrelevant. They bring the commander back from the dead. They bring other characters back from the dead. They have characters who've been around for hundreds of years, like Koss. I'm really over all of that. So I do not want us to go to the Miss to revive Blish, to make Blish a character again. I think that would be catastrophically bad writing on ArenaNet's part. What I do want to do is Blish made this sacrifice to keep this tracker going so that we could do battle with Kralkatorrik and all this business, and then we all just move on. Gorik and Taimi are told that, hey, Blish didn't make it back, and they're all really sad, and then we all move on immediately. And Taimi's got this big news about her disease being is no longer in remission, and now she's in danger again, and all this is, and nobody seems to care about Blish after that. Why? That's terrible, man. Blish was a fantastic character. He made this huge sacrifice. We have these huge productions to say goodbye to people like Air and Traherne. Nothing for Blish. So this is an opportunity to kind of do that, and do it in the exact right place, which is the Mist, which is where we lost him in the first place. So we could go into the Fractals of the Mist, essentially to say goodbye, in a manner of speaking. But also, it's worth noting that he gave up sort of his ability to remain conscious or sentient to power this tracker, right? So is the tracker still running? Like, is he still powering that? And if so, maybe it's time to just go power all that down, right? And because we don't know what it looked like when Kralkatorrik finally got to him and snatched him up and all this, like there's again with the Mist being so diverse and really being a blank canvas for telling a story, a blank piece of paper where they could do anything, then they could give us a lot there as we go into the Mist, kind of bid farewell to Blish and see his final resting place and kind of honor it in some way, right? And I even like the idea, and really you could do this with a few of these, but with this one in particular, I like the idea of a hard mode, because they also said when they were talking about rolling out these fractals, one per expansion, that they would have a hard mode, right? I would love to see like Blish's little cape that he has on his little golem as being like a hard mode reward for this fractal or something like that. Like there's a lot of interesting things you could do that would allow the player to kind of show everyone that they defeated this fractal on hard mode, and thus they have like honored Blish and stuff. So for me, that's a really fun one. That's why it's my number one idea for a fractal that I would like to see going forward from ArenaNet. So those are my 5 big ideas. I don't expect any of them to actually come to fruition, except for maybe the Ritlock one, because there are a lot of players talking about that. But for the most part, these aren't things that I actually expect to see. These are things that I would love to see. So by all means, let me know what you think in the comments, and I appreciate your time. You have a good one.